It's just something about me personally you don't like.
Alta, you always look just beautiful.
Then why don't you kiss me like everybody else does?
Everybody?
Where are we? Where are we?
Between light and shadow.
Hey Barbies, hey Kens, it's Craig. Welcome back to Between Light and Shadow, the podcast that bravely takes on the Twilight Zone in a mannequin challenge and holds perfectly still. But we still lose, which in this case is a good thing, because to win this particular mannequin challenge would require us to relinquish our very humanity. June 1960. After 30-plus weeks on the air, the Twilight Zone had covered a lot of territory. Interplanetary exploration, time travel, nuclear Armageddon, deals with the devil, a veritable cornucopia of tried-and-true genre tropes, and it did 'em up fine. But the show had demonstrated that it was equally adept at tackling less tangible, more esoteric subjects. Example, the nature of identity. What is it to exist? To be? Or not, as the case may be. The very first episode, Where Is Everybody?, concerned an amnesiac in a town without people, trying to piece together who he was. Then there was The Four of Us Are Dying, in which the main character could change his appearance and essentially become anyone. Mirror Image, which we haven't covered yet on the podcast, found Vera Miles being tormented by her doppelganger. All three serve as variations on the basic question of what it is to exist, to be human. If Mike Ferris can't remember who he is he anyone at all? Arch Hammer is wonderful at impersonating others, but at what point do the alternate identities collectively obscure the man beneath that highly malleable musculature? And if Millicent Barnes can be supplanted so easily by a double, was she ever that solid, that real, to begin with? That's one of the more impressive aspects of the show's legacy. It took the young television format to places it had never dared venture before. And you have to wonder if the audiences of the day even caught the deeper questions in these episodes, or if they simply swallowed them as tales well told. They do work that way. Where Is Everybody isn't necessarily a favorite of mine, but I certainly respect it. But The Four of Us Are Dying and Mirror Image are two of my favorites, so I guess I gravitate a bit toward the episodes that spark that inner dialogue. Who am I? Who are any of us? How do I fit into the universe? And what happens if I don't fit into it? If I die, or just disappear altogether, would the world be any different at all? On June 10th, 1960, The Twilight Zone presented another variation on that deepest of existential mysteries with its strangest, most disturbing tale yet. The After Hours was written by Rod Serling and directed by Douglas Hayes. Hayes had already directed 3 episodes by this point, and When the Sky Was Opened, which is another favorite of mine that we haven't covered yet, but we will soon, like really soon. Stay tuned. Hayes also directed Elegy and The Chaser. We haven't covered those either, but we will, just maybe not quite as soon. We did already cover his season 2 episode, The Howling Man, which was certainly a handsomely mounted production, so this ain't our first Doug Hayes rodeo. Now, right off the bat, we see something that we haven't encountered yet here on the podcast, a different opening sequence. Wait, back up. Since the very first episode, the show has always started with the same reliable opening. I can't exactly show it to you, but I can play the audio for you and describe the visuals. So we have some kind of weird honeycomb-looking texture thing, undulating, overlapping. Then we've got some clouds hanging around near the top of the screen. Then a barren landscape, which is empty at first, but then these cute little rocky outcroppings show up. And then those are suddenly casting shadows, which is a cool little effect. We then see a big rocky formation surrounding what looks like a cave. We pan in towards it, then up to a starry sky. The Twilight Zone logo appears, then we pan down to the episode. Now, the series would ultimately have 5 distinct opening sequences, but that one right there is the original, and it's also my favorite. It's surreal and vague, almost impressionistic. Why the clouds? Why the cave? What does it all mean? We don't know. They're just cool, mysterious visuals that exist for their own sake. Kind of reminds me of the toccata and fugue in D minor segment from Fantasia.
What you're going to see are the designs and pictures and stories that music inspired in the minds and imaginations of a group of artists. In other words, these are not going to be the interpretations of trained musicians, which I think is all to the good. Now, there are 3 kinds of music on this Fantasia program. First, there's the kind that tells a definite story. Then there's the kind that, while it has no specific plot, does paint a series of more or less definite pictures. Then there's the third kind, music that exists simply for its own sake. Now, the number that opens our Fantasia program, a toccata and fugue, is music of this third kind, what we call absolute music. Even the title has no meaning beyond a description of the form of the music. What you will see on the screen is a picture of the various abstract images that might pass through your mind if you sat in a concert hall listening to this music. At first, you're more or less conscious of the orchestra. So our picture opens with a series of impressions of the conductor and the players. Then the music begins to suggest other things to your imagination. They might be, just masses of color. Or there may be cloud forms, or great landscapes, or vague shadows, or geometrical objects floating in space.
Yeah, if you just listened to that ethereal Bernard Herrmann theme with your eyes closed, your mind might very well conjure up those sorts of abstract, seemingly unrelated visuals. In fact, many of those examples are used in the various Twilight Zone openings. And by the way, that was the original Deems Taylor Fantasia narration, not that bastardized Corey Burton dubbed version you hear on the DVD and the Blu-ray. Fantasia is one of my favorite films of all time, and it definitely looks amazing in high def. But every time Deems Taylor talks, it's not his voice, and it's distracting as hell. So toward the end of season 1, the standard opening was replaced with something very different. It's much shorter and much, much simpler. More direct, let's say. So there's a big eyeball just sort of floating there, eyelashes and all. It's not cartoony at all. It's either a photo or a very realistic painting. A black line appears down near the bottom of the screen, starting from the right and stretching all the way across. The eyeball is replaced by a bright sun, at which point the rest of the eye fades away. It all goes dark as the sun descends behind the black line. I get it, it's like a horizon. The Twilight Zone logo ascends from behind the black line, first black, then bright white as it reaches the center of the screen, at which point the black background becomes a starry night. We pan down to the episode. Still surreal, but less vague. There's something beautiful, albeit disquieting, about that eye. It actually looks a lot like that close-up of Janet Leigh's eye right after the murder scene in Psycho. Just frozen, staring. It's surreal. The eyeball is a recurring image in surrealist art, and for good reason. The sight of an unblinking, staring eye is just creepy. Now, the music is the same, sort of. It's the Bernard Herrmann theme, reorchestrated and shortened, with a repeating bass drum that adds a subtle sense of urgency. I should also mention that the logo is different. Basic block letters instead of the jagged, slightly cockeyed font used before. This opening was only used for the last 5 episodes of Season 1, starting with Mr. Beavis, and was never used again. Well, it might be the final 6 episodes. By some accounts, it started with A Passage for Trumpet, which aired the week before Mr. Beavis. Accounts differ. I'm not going to go into the whole polarizing controversy here, but I'll put a link to my blog entry about it in the show notes for inquiring minds. Anyway, when the show came back for Season 2, they'd created a completely different opening sequence with a completely different opening theme by a completely different composer with a much higher earworm factor. But you already knew that, didn't you? So the After Hours starts with that new short-lived alternate opening sequence, and then we're in a department store, and who do we see but that goddess of beauty and light, the radiant and awe-inspiring Anne Francis. And, okay, let's just get it out of the way.
That chick that won't quit. It's like stacked, like beautiful.
You should see me, I'm beautiful.
Now, she's not necessarily sexy here, but she's undeniably beautiful. She'll come back for Season 4's Jezebel, where she'll be so hot and sultry, it'll make your eyes cross, your nose bleed, and your wedding ring just sort of fall off.
Hey!
How can she hear me with the door closed? Here, Anne Francis is very, I don't know, put together, dressed really sharp, hair pulled back tight. You know that Cake song?
Girl who knows what's best. I want a girl with shoes that cut and eyes that burn like cigarettes. I want a girl with the right allocations, who is fast and thorough and sharp as a tack. She's playing with her jewelry, she's putting up her hair, she's touring the facility and picking up slack. I want a girl with a short skirt and a long jacket.
Right, just like that. She's all business. And she kind of looks like she could kick my ass if I don't do what she says. And you'd think that would be the opposite of a turn on, and yet... Okay, so she's all business, and befitting the all business type, she's on a bit of a mission in this department store.
What in particular were you looking for?
Thimbles. Gold thimbles. You had them advertised.
That would be specialties, ma'am. The 9th floor.
The elevator operator seems a bit, I don't know, not rude exactly, just odd, kind of stiff. His movements seem a bit mechanical, especially when he closes the door right in Marsha's face after she gets out. This is one of those things I never noticed over 3 decades and probably a couple dozen viewings of this episode, so it's pretty subtle. So there's nothing on the 9th floor, except for one display case with one gold thimble inside.
Oh, that's odd.
What is, Marsha?
Well, you haven't any merchandise here at all. Except the thimble. Except the very thing I needed. Oh, the whole floor, it looks so empty. And you called me Marsha.
Did I? I'm sorry. That was forward of me. I apologize.
How did you know my name?
I've probably seen you around the store.
No, you haven't. I've never seen you. Now, look, I don't want to make a big thing out of this, but what kind of a place is this? I mean, all I want is one small item, a gold thimble. I come up on a floor that hasn't a single thing in evidence except what I'm looking for. Well, you may be a little more sophisticated than I am, but this I call odd.
Please come again. Anytime.
You know, the saleswoman's movements are pretty stiff, too. Never really caught that before. Interesting. I mean, Their respective positions would require them to stand up straight and be poised, but maybe there's another reason.
Miss White, are you happy?
I beg your pardon. Am I what? Am I happy? Well, you'll forgive me, but that's really none of your business.
Really? It's none of my business. All right, Miss White, suit yourself. It's none of my business.
Catfight. Well, not quite. The elevator door opens, interrupting them before the fists start flying, and then it happens.
Oh, shit!
Wait, what?
How dare you! Oh, my God!
Straight out of context.
Okay, this is where we take a line of dialogue which makes perfect sense in the context of the episode, but takes on an entirely, and usually inappropriate, meaning when it's isolated on its own. The elevator operator says to Marsha, the highly desirable Anne Francis, what every heterosexual male watching is probably imagining himself doing.
Going down.
Oh, shit!
Straight out of context.
Hey, come on. Don't be like that. I'm trying to swear less, but we've still got to earn our explicit rating somehow. So, inside the elevator, Marsha takes a closer look at the gold thimble she just bought.
This is scratched. Well, I didn't notice that before. I can't send this to my mother. It's scratched and it's dented too. Look here.
Complaints, third floor.
Look at this thing. It's scratched and it looks as if somebody stepped on it or something.
On the third floor, Marsha complains about the scratched thimble to Mr. Sloan, the store manager, and Mr. Armbruster, who I assume is the floor manager or some such.
Now, why don't you take it back to the gift department and...
Mr. Sloan, I just explained to Mr. Armbruster here I did not purchase this in the gift department. I was taken up to the 9th floor.
That's what makes it so difficult to understand. You see, we don't have a 9th floor.
I was taken to the 9th floor. I was waited on by a very odd woman. I paid cash.
Your receipt?
My receipt? I didn't get a receipt, but I paid cash.
It's at this moment that it occurs to us that what we've seen so far may, in fact, not be happening. Outside of her own delusional head, that is. But then something else happens, which is witnessed by Armbruster and Sloan, and is therefore presumably real. Marsha sees the rude saleslady and calls out to her, at which point a store employee picks up the saleslady and walks off with her. Holy hell, she's a mannequin! When we come back from commercial, it's 6 o'clock and the store is about to close. A brief exchange between Armbruster and Miss Keevers, another employee, reveals that Marsha is asleep. Somewhere. Armbruster directs her to wake Marsha up and get her out of the store, but then she gets sidetracked by a last-minute customer, so she never does it. You can probably see where this is going. Marsha wakes up alone. The store is completely empty. She wanders around a bit, then tries the elevators. Neither seem to work. She heads toward the exit, but the door is locked.
Somebody, please, I'm locked in here. Anyone? I need some help. Anyone? Please?
There's a really great shot here of her face, obscured by the pebbled glass of the door. At first it appears to be nothing more than a cool artsy visual, but in retrospect, well, it's a visual clue that perhaps her reality, her identity, isn't as clear-cut as we might have thought. So she's getting a bit upset at being locked in. She accidentally knocks over a mannequin and is shocked to see that it looks just like the elevator operator from earlier. She then starts to hear voices.
Marsha. Marsha.
Who do you think you're fooling, Marsha?
Come on, dear. Climb off it.
You remember, Marsha?
You know who you are.
Then one of the mannequins raises its arm toward her, apparently of its own accord, and then more voices are heard, and they seem to be coming from the mannequins.
Marsha.
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 And in the middle of all this surreal beckoning, I find myself reminded of all things, the Brady Bunch.
Marsha, Marsha, Marsha!
Now, the Brady Bunch didn't exist in 1960, so this is a retroactive association. Viewers at the time wouldn't have giggled here. This is certainly not a strike against the episode. So Marsha's really starting to freak out now. She backs into the elevator, which opens all by itself for her, and takes her crying uncontrollably all the way up to the top floor. It's not marked, but we know it's the 9th floor. The doors open, and the mannequin version of the rude sales lady is standing there to greet her. Marsha backs up and slumps to her knees, sobbing, defeated. The sales lady, who now appears just as human and alive as Marsha, takes her hand and leads her into the empty 9th floor. All the mannequins slowly step down from their various displays and circle her, smiling creepily at her. Even creepier are the 2 male mannequins with ski masks on. One's holding skis, so they're obviously from a winter wear display, but damn, were ski masks really this creepy back in the 60s? And speaking of retro associations, the second one with the black mask has a faint whiff of Pulp Fiction about him.
Well, bring out the gimp. I think the gimp's sleeping. Well, I guess you just have to go wake him up now, won't you?
That's odd. It's really odd, but suddenly I seem to...
Remember, coming back now, is it?
I'm a mannequin. That's what I am. I'm a mannequin. And it was my turn to...
Your turn to leave us for a month. Becoming much clearer now, isn't it? You left us for a month, and you lived with the outsiders. But you were due back yesterday, and you didn't show up. You know, Marsha, that's very selfish, my dear. All of us wait our turn, and we simply do not overstay it. Oh. It was my turn starting last night. I'm 1 day delayed already.
Of course. Of course, I'm sorry. I forgot. When you're on the outside, everything seems so normal. As if we were like the others. Like the outsiders. Like the real people.
So the sales lady, who must have a name, since Marsha does. In fact, they should all have names, shouldn't they? Well, she's off for her 30-day excursion. I mean, I hope it's a full 30. Hopefully the scheduling isn't so tight that she'll only get 29, thanks to Marsha coming back a day late.
Did you enjoy yourself, Marsha? Was it fun?
Ever so much fun. Ever so much fun.
A nice moment here. Marsha adopts a stiff pose, arms slightly bent, just like the mannequin that she is. The next day, it's business as usual at the department store, until Mr. Armbruster sees a mannequin that looks an awful lot like that crazy woman with the gold thimble from the day before. The After Hours was the final episode on the production roster for season 1, or at least it would have been if the mighty Casey hadn't required massive reshoots. Long story, not going to go into it here. The mighty Casey ended up premiering the week after the After Hours, but even then season 1 wasn't quite over. The honor of closing out Twilight Zone's inaugural year was reserved for Richard Matheson's A World of His Own. I think the After Hours would have made a great season finale, and it seems more appropriate to close it out with a Serling script, but A World of His Own was actually the right choice, which we'll discuss whenever we get to it. The After Hours is another example of the show firing on all cylinders and producing something truly magnificent and unforgettable. It's a masterclass in editing. A woman locked in a department store isn't scary, not by a long shot, but drench her in film noir shadows, surround her with disembodied voices and mannequin faces that you wouldn't bat an eye at in the daylight, but at night... And then you cut it together in a way that not only depicts the story beats, but pulls the viewer into a degree that they are experiencing the terror right along with the protagonist. It doesn't hurt that your leading lady is a brilliant actress who completely sells the mounting terror that her character is experiencing. We don't really have a reason to care, necessarily. We don't really know Marsha at all, and what little we've seen doesn't exactly engender our goodwill. She's been rude and demanding with retail employees, which, as a former retail employee, I do tend to bristle a bit at. She comes off like an entitled rich girl, but, and this is a big but, she's a woman in peril, which in 1960 provided a quick shorthand way to garner sympathy for your heroine. Remember The Hitchhiker, the radio drama with the male protagonist? Serling changed the gender for his Twilight Zone adaptation because, in his own words, it's pertinent and it's dramatic to make it a woman. I'll give you a second to groan and roll your eyes. Yeah, I know, it was 1960 and things were different. And for the record, and I should have said this when I covered The Hitchhiker, I'm actually more drawn in by the radio drama, but it's Orson effing Welles, and as much as I love Inger Stevens, well, she's no Orson Welles. But Anne Francis, okay, she's no Orson Welles either, but I'm comfortable saying she's one of the greatest actresses to ever appear on The Twilight Zone. The only better actress I can think of off the top of my head, and I do realize that this is entirely subjective, is probably Gladys Cooper. But the other actress in the After Hours ain't no slouch. Elizabeth Allen plays the sales lady / mannequin, and small world alert, she appeared in 2 episodes of Boris Karloff's thriller in 1961, The Hungry Glass and The Grim Reaper, which were the same 2 episodes that starred Twilight Zone veteran William Shatner, and one of them, The Hungry Glass, was directed by Douglas Hayes. That episode also co-starred Russell Johnson and Donna Douglas, both Twilight Zone veterans. God, how did we ever live without the IMDb?
I'm a mannequin. That's what I am. I'm a mannequin.
One of the episode's many strengths lie in the beautifully rendered mannequin faces. They could have easily used regular, generic mannequin heads, which still would have worked, but they opted instead to create actor-specific faces for the mannequin versions of the main characters. Marsha, the sales lady, and the elevator operator. The identical approach was used 2 years later for the 3rd season episode 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, in which 5 people trapped in a giant cylindrical room are ultimately revealed to be, spoiler alert, unloved dolls in a toy donation barrel. I considered pairing it with the After Hours for this episode, but those are dolls, not mannequins. But they did use mannequins for the doll effect, to great effect. We have William Tuttle and his staff in the MGM makeup department to thank for the amazing work in both episodes, but his skills weren't limited to mannequin heads. He's also responsible for the pig-faced doctors in Eye of the Beholder and the Mardi Gras facial makeovers in The Masks, among other iconic makeup effects for the show. The show's overall iconic look is enhanced considerably thanks to him.
So Charlie Schramm, when I left MGM, Charlie Schramm, who did The Masks, gave me the head that, a head that he had there of my face. And for kicks, I gold-leafed it. It's up on my shelf somewhere in the closet.
Strange. Oh, that's strange. The head of the MGM makeup department was William Tuttle at the time. Were you familiar with him?
Oh, yes.
During this?
Oh, yes. But Charlie Schramm was the one who did the work on.
Did he do the work on everyone, or was William Tuttle supervising it all? Or?
William Tuttle was the head of the department. Supervised it. Charlie Schramm was and is, I believe Charlie's still here, brilliant.
There were at least 2 Marsha heads created, and if you do a Google image search for Anne Francis mannequin, you'll see some pictures of 2 Anne Francis mannequins. So she got one, and the other one stayed in Tuttle's workshop, at least until 1966, when it showed up in a short film entitled William Tuttle, the King of the Duplicators, a promotional piece by MGM depicting Tuttle's amazing makeup skills. He's showing off a number of very impressive plaster casts of celebrities' faces, and then the aforementioned Anne Francis head, not a cast, but the actual full-color head, is brought out.
Now, these masks are what you use to form these different character makeups, correct?
That's right.
For instance, once you used a mask of Anne Francis.
This was in a Twilight Zone.
In a Twilight
Zone
Zone
thriller? She played
thriller?
a mannequin. Now, this head was mounted on a mannequin body.
And this, of course, in vivid color looks exactly like Anne Francis, right down to the beautiful eyes. This is one of the uses of the mask that you make here.
This film would have been a perfect bonus feature on the Twilight Zone Blu-rays. But alas, it is viewable on YouTube, so I will put a link in the show notes. It's really cool. As is often the case on the Twilight Zone, and this is not a criticism, mind you, if you go back afterwards and start mulling over the details, well, things get a little bit hazy and a lot of questions arise. So each mannequin gets to live among the humans. So are they transforming into flesh and blood for this? We see the mannequins move and speak when they interact with Marsha, so it certainly appears that they do transform. Or are they actually not changing, and they only appear plastic and immobile to human eyes? Well, we see the sales lady being picked up and lugged around stiff as a board by an employee, so they'd have to feel plastic as well. Can they change states at will? But whether or not they physically transform isn't really important. What's important is that they get to leave for a month. But where do they go? Where's Marsha been living for the past month? She pulls out $25 cash to pay for the gold thimble. Where'd she get it? Do they get an allowance when they leave the mall? And why does she think she has a mother? Do they get a set of false memories when they leave? Like a spy having an intricate backstory? And what exactly brought Marsha back, since she forgot she was a mannequin to begin with? Is there some sort of built-in biological urge to return, like salmon returning to the waters in which they were born? She says she came for the gold thimble, which she saw in an advertisement, but that seems like an almost impossible coincidence. What are the odds that she would have seen the advertisement at all? Did the other mannequins take out the ad? Is the idea of acquiring a gold thimble the subconscious trigger that draws her home? What's the larger story here? Why is any of this happening at all? Why are there sentient mannequins in this department store? It seems they can move and speak at will, but choose not to in the presence of humans. Is this phenomenon limited to this department store, or do all mannequins belong to some sort of secret population? I do love the idea of inanimate objects having secret lives. Toy Story comes to mind. Plus, I do remember pretending that my Star Wars action figures were engaging in all sorts of night shenanigans while I slept. Hey, that sounds cool. Night shenanigans. Not to be confused with film director M. Night Shenanigan. There's such a bigger story here. Why must the mannequins live in secret? How did this begin? There have been humans or proto-humans on the Earth for millions of years, but the mannequin is a more recent thing. How recent? For that, we'll consult... yeah, you know. Shop mannequins are derived from dress forms used by fashion houses for dressmaking. The use of mannequins originated in the 15th century, when miniature milliners' mannequins were used to demonstrate fashions for customers. Full-scale wickerwork mannequins came into use in the mid-18th century. Wirework mannequins were manufactured in Paris from 1835. The first fashion mannequins, made of papier-mâché, were made in France in the mid-19th century. Mannequins were later made of wax to produce a more lifelike appearance. In the 1920s, wax was supplanted by a more durable composite made with plaster. Modern-day mannequins are made from a variety of materials, the primary ones being fiberglass and plastic. The fiberglass mannequins are usually more expensive than the plastic ones, tend to be not as durable, but are significantly more impressive and realistic. Plastic mannequins, on the other hand, are a relatively new innovation in the mannequin field and are built to withstand the hustle of customer foot traffic usually witnessed in the store they are placed in. Mannequins are used primarily by retail stores as in-store displays or window decoration. However, many online sellers also use them to display their products for their product photos, as opposed to using a live model. While the classic female mannequin has a similar to average breast size, manufacturers are now selling sexy/busty mannequins and voluptuous female mannequins with 40 double Ds and Barbie doll sized waists. Wait, what? Hey, honey, can I maybe get a... No. Damn it. Okay, so we have this society of living creatures masquerading as lowly mannequins, modeling our clothes in silent, sullen servitude. What's up with that? Do they exist as a loose collective across the world, like terrorist cells, individually working toward a greater goal? Which would be what? World domination? Are they waiting for the right time to rise up and take over? Are those 1-month excursions actually scouting missions in which they observe how humans behave when they aren't shopping to better learn how to infiltrate society? How has this not been a movie yet, or a TV series? You know, I should probably write up a proposal and get it out there before somebody scoops me. And here's something else I never thought of. There can't be that many mannequins in the store, right? So why didn't any of the employees, Mr. Armbruster, Mr. Sloan, that cute little number at the perfume counter, whoever else, notice that Marsha was identical to one of their mannequins? Sure, she's been gone for a month.
But you were due back yesterday and you didn't show up.
Okay, sorry, a month and a day. But she's presumably been in the store for a while, long enough to deserve a sabbatical. Marsha isn't some generic type. She has a very distinctive face with a very distinctive mole. Or maybe that's part of the point. We see them all around us, but we don't really see them. Maybe our brains have a natural filter that distinguishes between a real live face and that of a doll, and there's no recognition overlap. Maybe that's why Armbruster blows it off when he appears on the verge of making the connection in the final scene. And maybe, just maybe, the mannequins know this and are able to take advantage of it to hide their true selves. But maybe we oblivious humans are starting to catch on. How else do you explain this mannequin challenge craze? Rod Serling is credited with writing 92 of the Twilight Zone's 156 episodes. Some were adaptations of existing stories by other writers, but most were originals. There's no indication in the credits that the After Hours isn't an original story. However, British author John Collier published a short story in 1940 called Evening Primrose. It's presented as a series of journal entries on a notepad found in a department store. It's an account written by Charlie, a poet and malcontent who decides to retire from the human race and live in hiding in a department store. You know, like everybody does at some point in their lives. There, he discovers a colony of night people, similar souls who have resigned from civilization. He falls in love with one of them, a young girl named Ella. However, she rejects his profession of love by telling him that she's actually in love with the store's night watchman, who she plans to reveal herself to. Interaction between the night people and others is strictly forbidden, the penalty for which is a visit from the Dark Men, who are charged with killing offenders and surgically altering their corpses to become mannequins. Their conversation is overheard, and the next day, Charlie watches helplessly as Ella is dragged off by the Dark Men. The account ends with Charlie planning to join forces with the Night Watchman to somehow save her. If they are captured, he implores whomever finds the notepad to avenge them by exposing the Night People. Now, The After Hours is not based on Evening Primrose, despite the fairly substantial similarities between them. Or at least, I don't think it is. Mark Scott Zicree, author of the Twilight Zone Companion, provides some interesting information in his commentary track for the After Hours on the DVD and Blu-ray.
When Rod first sold Twilight Zone, he was, of course, enormously inspired by and impressed by Ray Bradbury, the great science fiction writer who would ultimately write one episode of the series. So he went to Ray's house and he said, okay, I need to be educated about science fiction, so I need give me some books to read. Even though Rod had read the pulps as a kid, he probably hadn't been reading science fiction extensively during his rise in television because he was so busy writing. And so Ray went down to the basement of his house with Rod and pulled out several books. He pulled out one of his own. He pulled out one by Richard Matheson, one by John Collier. And John Collier was one of the great fantasy writers of British literature. And there's a story that John Collier wrote called Evening Primrose. And so certainly, although this is not a literal adaptation of Evening Primrose, it is strongly influenced by Evening Primrose. But this is certainly Serling's response to John Collier's story, and a brilliant and evocative and just a terrific job, because it's not that same story, but it's inspired by that story, and that inspired that whole notion of being menaced in space and the mannequins coming to life.
Now, I'm not sure where Zicree got that information. It's not in his book, but he does possess an encyclopedic knowledge of the Twilight Zone, so I am inclined to believe him. In The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, writer Martin Grams Jr. goes a lot further. Charles Beaumont wrote Serling a letter in December 1960 regarding concerns that Serling was perhaps unintentionally borrowing story ideas from other writers. Beaumont didn't outright accuse him of plagiarism, at least not in so many words. One of the numerous examples he cited was the similarity between Evening Primrose and the After Hours. In his written response, Serling stated, "Number one, and first and foremost, I am not a plagiarist. I have never stolen another writer's line, theme, dialogue, mood, or concept. I have never knowingly put down on paper what is either the sum total of a fraction of another man's work. And when you say that I have consistently, through a process of some kind of osmosis and subconscious assimilation, taken other people's central ideas and unwittingly claimed them for my own, is charitable but wholly euphemistic. I am frankly appalled, Chuck, at this particular revelation. How in Christ's name can Collier sue me when our stories are a world apart? If Mr. Collier feels in his heart that I can be sued for plagiarism on this score, I would welcome such a suit." Now I'm fine calling it simple inspiration. And the two stories do take very different directions, since Serling's secret society is comprised of actual sentient mannequins versus Collier's pasty societal dropouts. And while Evening Primrose is a horror story with a tragic ending, Serling's teleplay has the tense build-up of a horror story, but it ultimately turns out to be something bizarre but not really horrific at all. I really do like the Collier story, though. And I thought about reading it here, but then my research yielded something very interesting. It was adapted into a radio drama in 1947 on a show called simply Escape. Here's a taste.
I looked around. I saw nothing. I looked again. I saw an old man come clambering out from behind a clock. There were 3 elderly ingenues, incredibly emaciated, pale as lace, almost transparent, simpering before the perfume counter. A chintzy lady swam out from the curtains and drapes. They came swarming thick around me, pale, thin, wispy, moving silently, fluttering like gauze in the wind, whispering.
How raw he looks.
Who is he?
As coarse as the sun.
What is he doing here?
A detective. Send for the dark men. Yes, send for the dark men.
The dark men.
They were pressing around me, clawing, holding me, their pale faces contorted with venomous, inhuman hatred.
So I gave it a listen, and it's really faithful to the text. And hell, wouldn't you rather hear that than listen to me bumbling my way through reading it storytime style? Thing is, it runs about half an hour, which seems a bit long to insert in the middle of the proceedings here. So instead, I'm going to release a separate bonus episode in which I will present in its entirety the vintage radio adaptation of Evening Primrose, kind of like I did last week with the Moat Farm murder. But now, hey, don't get too used to getting 2 episodes a week. Greedy little monsters. Now, whether or not Evening Primrose, the story and or the radio drama, is a true antecedent of Serling's teleplay, it's still highly entertaining in its own right, and it definitely has a creepy Twilight Zone feel to it. So when you're done here, advance immediately to the bonus episode and check it out. The After Hours doesn't have an original music score. In fact, there's not much music in it at all. But what we do get are brief cues from Bernard Herrmann's score for the pilot episode Where Is Everybody?, which again is another episode that meditates on the meaning of identity. Now, viewers in 1960 wouldn't have connected these 2 episodes on that basis, since they had no way to refer back to the earlier episode and notice the same underscore, but it's a great example of the forethought that went into choosing pre-existing music for these episodes. Since we're in a department store, we get some generic elevator muzak here and there. That's soothing, isn't it? And for those high-impact jump scare moments, a cue called Shock Therapy Number 3 by Renee Garriguenc is heard. That is not soothing. But that little tinkling at the end is lovely. It's kind of like a soft pillow after that anvil crashes down on your head. Now, in keeping with the plastic vibe this week...
Hey, kid, you want a toy?
Looks like a really rich 4th grader lives here.
You can collect them all, each sold separately.
Wrapped in plastic.
I am a collector.
They're action figures, not dolls.
The After Hours is another episode to be memorialized in action figure form. Biff Bang Pow released a 3 3/4-inch Marsha action figure just last year in both their customary monochrome paint scheme and a convention-exclusive color version. I hate to say this, but she's ugly, man. Google Twilight Zone Marsha action figure and prepare to be horrified. I didn't realistically expect them to get permission from Anne Francis's estate to use her likeness, but it should at least be pretty, right? Ugh. At least they included her signature mole. Now, they've done some great work on other Twilight Zone items, but man, this is pretty egregious. Now, normally at this point, we transition to another classic Twilight Zone episode, the aforementioned bookend episode. But we're not doing that this week for 2 reasons. First, there's really no other classic zone that snugly coexists alongside the After Hours. It's a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. It's in a class all by itself. And second, fast forward 26 years and 4 months. The new Twilight Zone is in its 2nd season on CBS. Okay, it wasn't called the new Twilight Zone, but we call it that to keep them straight. It's easier to say than Twilight Zone revival / remake / reboot, or even 1980s Twilight Zone. After a promising start the year before, the ratings on this revival / remake / reboot have pretty much tanked, and it's looking down the barrel of a network cancellation. Now, the series usually presented original stories, but every so often they'd remake a classic. Just to... Honestly, I don't know why they did that. They probably shouldn't have, since every single remake pales in comparison to the original. On October 18th, 1986, a remake of The After Hours aired. Terry Farrell, Jadzia Dax from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, played Marsha, and it went a little something like this.
Please be open. It's gotta be open.
Marsha 2.0 arrives at the mall right at closing time. She's locked out, but an odd gentleman lets her inside. Multiple people advise her that the mall is closed, but she clearly has no concept of people wanting to go home to their families or whatever.
Galleria's closing, ma'am.
I know, but there's something I need to get tonight. It's very important. Please? I'll only be a minute, I promise.
Of course.
If you've ever worked in retail like me, you know that this immediately identifies her as an asshole. A creepy guy watches her as she makes a beeline for a toy store, where a slightly weird saleswoman awaits.
May I help you? Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you're still here. I thought for sure I'd blown it. You know you're about the only store in the gallery still open? How may I help you? I'm looking for one of those cornfield kid dolls. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
They're very popular.
Oh, tell me about it. That's all I hear out of my landlord's little girl. That's who I want one for. Please tell me you still have one.
I do believe that we have a few left in the back for special customers.
Well, I don't know what makes somebody a special customer, but I'd really appreciate it if I could.
Wait right here. I'll get one for you.
So, no gold thimble, no mother. A little kid shows up with, we presume, his mother in tow, and things get a bit ominous. First, the kid seems to know her name, and then...
Apologize for disturbing the nice woman and we'll go.
Take me with you when you go. Please. I'm ready.
Excuse us.
Marsha Part 2 proceeds to throw out a bunch of backstory.
Oh, my landlord's kid is gonna do a backflip. You know, it's the least I can do for them. I moved in about a month ago. I didn't have any money for the first month's rent. I didn't even have a job. And he gave me the place anyway. And he gave me a lead on the job I got. And he's been a real doll.
Weird side note here. As Marsha's talking, the sales lady takes off her jacket, takes off her scarf, and reaches for her shirt collar like she's gonna take that off too, all for no apparent reason. And then the saleswoman starts grilling her.
What was your life like before this past month? For example, where are you from?
What?
Tell me.
I don't remember.
Do you have any identification?
Of course, I have my temporary employee card from work.
But no driver's license, no social security card?
I just applied when I got the job.
What are your parents' names? Do you have any brothers or sisters? Where did you go to school?
Why are you doing this to me?
You don't remember, do you?
Remember what? My name is Marsha Cole, and I live at...
Where were you before this past month, Marsha?
Why are you doing this to me?
Think, Marsha.
Cue the third-rate John Carpenter wannabe music as Marsha 2 Electric Boogaloo gets spooked and takes off running. She gets into the elevator where the creepy guy that was watching her before is waiting. He holds up his hands, which look more like pink flippers.
Would you mind? How are you, Marsha?
Flipper hands and the maybe lesbian sales lady follow after her as she runs like hell through the mall. She tries to get out the way she came in and spots the guy who first let her inside. But oh shit, he's actually a mannequin. The chase continues until she locks herself inside of a room. Inside the room is a bin full of mannequin heads, which start talking to her.
Marsha.
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 At which point I find myself reminded again of...
Marsha, Marsha, Marsha!
But by 1986, Jan Brady and her jealousy toward her older sister was well known in the pop culture lexicon, so the connection is easily made. And there goes any potential for tension. Anyway, Marsha, the next generation, runs some more until she encounters the weird sales lady in flipper hands again.
What do you want from me?
We want you to think. To remember.
I don't want to think. I want to go home.
Marsha, you are home.
What is the matter with you?
I'm a mannequin. We all are.
No!
She runs away again, but one of her legs turns to plastic. She limps away, then one of her arms turns to plastic too. She keeps trying to get away, refusing to accept the truth. Then the other leg turns to plastic, and her flight is over.
Don't fight it, Marsha. You had your turn to go out and experience the real world for a month. Now it's someone else's turn. It's only fair.
He's right.
Dissolve to the next day. The mall is open, and we see all the characters in their true mannequin form, including Marsha. So, one of the most chilling and brilliant episodes from the original run, and they have the unmitigated gall to remake it. Now, I have to believe that the only valid reason for remaking anything is to do it better, right? Here's what's lost in translation: the moody, noirish black and white photography. Instead, we get bright neon colors, which never really go away even in the dark. We lose the minimal use of music, which provides large pockets of silence and makes everything creepier. Instead, here, we get wall-to-wall generic synth horror stylings. You lose Anne Francis, even though she was still alive in 1986, and would have been actually a great choice for the sales lady. Not to mention the event factor of bringing her back to the Twilight Zone probably would have helped the ratings. You gain Terry Farrell, who is totally hot, but come on, she's no Anne Francis. And you lose any and all subtlety, like every bit. Where the original Marsha realized her true self on her own with fairly gentle coaxing and relatively non-invasive prodding, new Marsha is positively bludgeoned with the truth.
Marsha, we're all mannequins, and so are you.
And she never really seems to accept it, even as she's watching her limbs turn to plastic. The remake is basically a 20-minute slasher movie, where the helpless female is chased by a slow-moving but relentless pursuer, so actually I guess the John Carpenter wannabe music is kind of appropriate. The mannequin life here is clearly more of a nightmare existence, since the child mannequin asked Marsha harder to take him away earlier. In the original, the reality of being a mannequin isn't necessarily a bad thing, at least as far as we can see, other than it's maybe kind of boring.
Did you enjoy yourself, Marsha? Was it fun?
Ever so much fun.
So, you've enjoyed this past month?
Oh, yeah. New place, new job, new friends.
The new Twilight Zone did pull off some pretty great episodes, but, well, this ain't one of them. So if we throw the superior original into the ring with the inferior remake, well, duh, it's no contest. The original scores a knockout mere seconds into the first round. It's like comparing the original version of The Day the Earth Stood Still with the Keanu Reeves remake. One is audacious and brilliant, and the other, isn't. Not even close. If you want a better 80s anthology TV mannequin story, look no further than Tales from the Dark Side, that ultra-low-budget late-night syndicated show created by George A. Romero, the man who popularized the concept of flesh-eating reanimated corpses with his 1968 film Night of the Living Dead, which I adore. And for the record, I harbor no animosity toward him for the zombie overload of recent years. Tales from the Dark Side originally aired back when I was feverishly videotaping the Twilight Zone in the mid-'80s, so many of my Twilight Zone VHS tapes have Tales from the Dark Side episodes on them too. It was a pretty hit-and-miss affair, but they occasionally transcended their low-budget late-night shackles and produced some pretty great stuff. One such triumph was the third season episode Everybody Needs a Little Love, a film noir based on a Robert Bloch short story and starring Jerry Orbach. And it went a little something like this.
It should have been just another Thursday. Thirst Day, I call it. Of course, as far as I'm concerned, every day is Thirst Day. The only thing on my mind was the sweet music of some jingling ice cubes. That's where it all started, Benny's Lounge. All I was looking for was a little quick amnesia. I mean, you try 10 hours a day selling life insurance. You gotta make them think about death, not life. Well, an hour or so in Benny's always made me forget about death. My own death and the death of my marriage. After my divorce, I got to spending all my evenings at Benny's.
I'm 2 up on you already.
No contest. Keep 'em filled till that's gone.
That's where I met Curtis. Curtis was a regular customer and a regular guy. They say misery loves company. Well, Curtis was great company.
One night, Roberts and Curtis get really shit-faced and steal a mannequin from the store where Curtis works.
I should have listened to that little voice telling me to stay put. I mean, Curtis always had funny ideas, but this one was out of bounds.
You aren't they gonna miss that thing down at the store?
Hell no. The store's got more of these than we ever use. She's just as lonely as we are. Everybody needs a little love, right, doll?
Here you go.
To Estelle.
Estelle.
I should have checked out right then and there.
Estelle, listen to this.
But it was so crazy, it was fun. And Curtis can be a real charmer, even with a dummy like Estelle. So I went along with it, telling jokes, reminiscing about the war, all kinds of nonsense. Yeah, we were drunk, real drunk. When Curtis started dancing with it, though, I started to feel like the odd man out, like a jealous schoolboy. Crazy, huh? I mean, after all, it was just a damn piece of wood, right? What happened next, I guess, I just rode off to all the booze. But as I was leaving, I could swear the damn thing stared at me. Just stared at me.
Curtis invites Roberts to his place for dinner, where they dine with Estelle.
Here you go, pal.
How about one for the lady?
Estelle doesn't like liquor. Don't worry, though. She's no prude. Never gives me any grief either. Isn't that right, honey? Huh? You're right. You hungry? I'm famished.
It seems Curtis is having an actual relationship with her. It.
Hey, Curtis, don't you think you're taking this thing a little too far?
Carrying what a little too far?
This business with Estelle. I mean, people might think you're off your nut.
Nah. It's like I always said. When you're solo, you get second-class treatment. Ever since me and Estelle have been going out.
Hey, get off it, will you, Curtis? What do you take me for, an idiot? This is a dummy, a lifeless, soulless piece of wood. Okay, look, I know I've had a few drinks, but you don't really expect me to believe this.
Keep your opinions to yourself, pal.
Okay. Maybe I was wrong, Curtis. Maybe you're a real lucky guy.
Now, it's probably the booze, but every time Roberts looks at Estelle, she seems to have changed position slightly. Roberts decides to play along with this bizarre charade and pretends to put some moves on Estelle. Curtis decks him and kicks him out.
Look, I know I was drunk, but, I mean, something was cracked. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Well, your mind can sure play some weird tricks on you.
We then get a great black and white dream sequence in which Estelle is real and Curtis is a mannequin. Roberts gets jostled awake by a police lieutenant who's investigating some missing merchandise at Curtis's store.
You don't think he's embezzling from the store, do you?
I don't think anything yet.
Hey, he got divorced a little while ago, same as me. And we used to drown the sorrows together, you know? That's all. Maybe you ought to talk to his ex.
You know where we can find her?
No, I never met her. We never talked much about the wives. I don't even know her name.
Estelle.
What?
Estelle, that's her name. Yeah, we like to talk to her, all right. See, that's another thing. He was married, like you say, but there's no record of any divorce. Lady's gone, though. Oof, not a trace. Kind of suspicious, wouldn't you say?
Roberts goes back to Curtis's place. Curtis is disheveled, out of sorts. Estelle is propped up in front of the new TV Curtis has brought home for her.
She won't let me out of her sight. I can't eat. I can't sleep. It's get me this. I want that. It's worse than when I was married. The only time I've been out is to pick up that television set.
Yeah, where'd you get the dough to buy something like that?
That's my business.
Curtis, listen, you're in more trouble than you realize. I gotta get you pulled together. I know this doctor, see? He can tell the cops.
You think I'm twisted? Is that it?
No, you just gotta get a grip on yourself, that's all.
Roberts offers to get Curtis some help, at which point he's cold-cocked from behind. When he comes to, Estelle is gone, and Curtis has a butcher's knife sticking out of his chest. At the police station, Roberts insists that the mannequin did it. A woman tells a detective that she witnessed Roberts having an affair with Curtis's wife Estelle, and that Curtis murdered her when he found out, and Roberts subsequently murdered Curtis. And the woman? Why, she's a live flesh and blood morsel who looks just like Estelle.
I told you, it was the mannequin. He called it Estelle, just like his wife. It was alive, I'm telling you. The mannequin was alive.
This is probably my single favorite Tales from the Dark Side episode, that I can remember anyway. It's been a long time since I made my way through the entire series. It totally feels like a story out of an EC comic, like The Vault of Horror or The Haunt of Fear, Tales from the Crypt, or shock suspense stories. Maybe even weird fantasy. And then there's the whole film noir framework. Roberts is telling the story while he's being interrogated by the cops, which isn't apparent until the end. We get copious amounts of darkness and cigarette smoke, plus a jazzy soundtrack. And Estelle? She may be a mannequin, but she's still a femme fatale. Yeah, I think that's probably enough plastic fantastic love for 1 week. If you want to get in touch with us, we're on Facebook and Tumblr. Just search for Twilight Zone Podcast and you'll find us. For a more direct connection, email us at zonepod@gmail.com. So what's up next? Well, immediately following this episode is the bonus episode I talked about earlier, but after that, well, I did mention And When the Sky Was Opened earlier, and as it turns out, I'll be mentioning it a lot more next time. So there's your clue. Till then, kids, beware of shifty-looking mannequins, and as always, play nice.
We're being watched, and we feel our pulse. We are showroom dummies. We are showroom dummies. We
light and shadow.